الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات آمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Bulugh al-Maram by Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, and we're still discussing matters regarding Kitab al-Buyu. So you have titled this chapter Kitab al-Buyu, and also he put a subtitle which is Bab Shurut al-Buyu, which is the condition of Buyu wa ma nuhi an, and also of those transactions that are said to be haram in Islam. So we'll be discussing, picking up from what we had stopped in the last session, where we discussed concerning matters relating to al-gharar, where he discussed of those masail, those matters that relates to certain transaction that are considered to be within those group of transaction that are said to be al-gharar, with some form of deception or things are unclear. So it makes the business, that contract to be invalid, or that business act to be invalid. So we'll be discussing some of those hadith and also the ahkam that can be taken from them. So as the normal pattern that we follow, that a hadith would be read, then the hadith would be a translation of the hadith. Then also we'll discuss the sahabi, if he's been mentioned for the first time. Also we go into takhrij of the hadith to some degree, more than what is the norm, where we try to look at what have been said by the ulama regarding the grading of hadith, whether hadith is authentic or not, and the aqwal of the ulama relating to that hadith. And then we discuss the fawahid and the benefits and the ahkam that can be taken from the hadith. So we'll have the hadith being read, and then we'll go into what have been mentioned as the method that we follow in discussing these ahadith. Tafaddal.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Hadith 689, narrated Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam forbade the selling of a fruit till it becomes ripe, or the selling of fur which is still on the back of an animal, or milk which is still in the udder, reported by At-Tabrani in Al-Awsat. Awsat. At-Tabarani also reported it. Abu Dawood reported it in Al-Marasil as a saying of Ikrimah, and that is the strongest opinion. He also reported it mawquf as a saying of a companion, Ibn Abbas, with a strong chain of narrators, and Al-Bayhaqi held it to the most correct narration. Hadith 690, narrated Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade the sale of what is in the womb of a she-camel and the semen that is in the body of a male camel. Reported by Al-Bazzar, and there is weakness in its isnad, chain of narrators.
So these are the two hadith that I mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah in this discussion regarding of those masail of al-buyu that includes things of gharra, where there's some form of deceit regarding the business transaction, or things of unclarity regarding that transaction. So of those hadith that he mentioned two hadith. The first hadith of Ibn Abbas ta'ala anhuma قال نهى رسول الله عليه السلام أن تباع الثمر حتى تدعم ولا يباع الصوف على ظهر ولا لبن في ذر. رواه طبراني في أوسط والدارقطني وأخرجه أبو داود في مراسيل لإكرمة وهو راجع. So that's the first, and I mean when they state وأخرجه أيضا موقوفا على ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما بإسناد قوي ورجه البيهقي. Then I mentioned the second hadith with the hadith of Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه أن النبي عليه السلام نهى عن بيع مضامين والملاقيح ورواه بزار وفي إسناده ضعف. So these are the two hadith that have been mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and has been already been translated by our reader. So as for the first hadith, that will go through the first hadith, then we'll go through the second hadith. As for the first hadith of Ibn Abbas, and we have mentioned Ibn Abbas in prior sessions before and lessons before, then he mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, naha an tuba thamaran hatta yut'am, or hatta tut'am. Then he mentioned regarding concerning takhrij of hadith, he mentioned رواه Tabarani في أوسط. So Imam At-Tabarani rahimahullah, that he has several or many books in hadith. So he is mentioned, he said to have these books that are referred to as ma'ajim. So he has these books, At-Tabarani rahimahullah, these books that are referred to as ma'ajim, and there are three: معجم الكبير, معجم الأوسط, ومعجم الصغير. So these are the four books of Tabarani that he has regarding hadith. So معجم الكبير is the larger version of his collection. Then he has Al-Awsat, which is the medium, and As-Saghir or Sogra, which is the smaller version. All these three books are in print. Al-Kabir is still, we have a portion of it, not the entire thing is printed, but a portion of that book of Mujam Al-Kabir, At-Tabarani rahimahullah, is in print. So I mentioned At-Tabarani fi Awsat. So I mentioned Al-Awsat. This is indicating that this narration that is mentioned by Tabarani is in the book of Awsat. Some mention also the hadith is in Al-Kabir. So the hadith that have been mentioned, that hadith is in Al-Awsat, but also Al-Kabir, as some have indicated. But he mentioned regarding the hadith here is in Al-Awsat. So that's concerning At-Tabarani rahimahullah. Then he mentioned Daraqutni. So Daraqutni rahimahullah also has several books in hadith, but the hadith also in his As-Sunan. So Daraqutni in his books As-Sunan. So then he mentioned with this hadith, akhrajahu, also the hadith akhrajahu Abu Dawood, yani As-Sajistani. So Abu Dawood rahimahullah was the author of As-Sunan, Sunan Abu Dawood. So the author of Sunan Abu Dawood, that he have several books. Of the other books that he have written, which is the book that is called Marasil. So Abu Dawood As-Sajistani, author of the books of Sunan, that also has a book called Marasil, that he mentioned this hadith in his book Al-Marasil. Then he mentioned, أخرج Abu Dawood في مراsil لإكرمة وهو الراجح. So he mentioned this hadith also is been collected or narrated by Abu Dawood in his collection of Marasil. And this hadith he mentioned لإكرمة, and upon Ikrama they mentioned وهو الراجح. When they mentioned that regarding concern, I said this is a Ikrama, meaning the narration of Ikrama, it is mursal by way of Ikrama, who's a tabi'in, narration upon the Prophet alayhi salam. So this is Ikrama, tabi'i, narrating upon the Prophet alayhi salam. So this is considered to be, that narration consists class as al-marasil or mursal. So when a tabi'i raise a hadith or narrate a hadith upon the Prophet alayhi salam, it is considered to be mursal. It's considered to be mursal. So the narration of Ikrama is mursal, is not muttasil. The narration of where he does not, Ikrama does not mention any Sahabi. He goes straight to the Prophet ﷺ, which is something which is that indicate that there's a breakage in the isnad, because there's others that are missing. As Ikrama, a tabi'i, it's impossible for him to narrate upon the Prophet ﷺ directly. So that's concerning that matter mentioned. Then he mentioned Akhrajo Aydhan, the hadith also been narrated also by others. He mentioned Mawqufan ala Ibn Abbas. So other narration of narrated hadith that is said to be Mawquf upon Ibn Abbas. So Ibn Abbas narrating this hadith from himself, not going back to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's considered to be Mawquf. So the narration of a Sahabi is referred to as Mawquf, and the narration upon the Prophet ﷺ is said to be Marfu, meaning the hadith goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. Then I mentioned أخرج أيضا موقوفا على ابن عباس بإسناد قوي, and the narration that goes back to the narration that going back to Ibn Abbas, that narration Ibn Ajah mentioned بإسناد قوي, that the isnad, the chain of narrators going back to Ibn Abbas, that narration is qawi. It's a strong narration. So the word qawi also is a term that is used by the ulama of hadith, indicating that it also is strong. So indicating maqbul, that is of those class of hadith that said to be maqbul. So what is normally mentioned between the ulama, or what is stated in the books of mustalah or usul ilm al-hadith, usul al-hadith, that hadith is of three categories. Three categories, the first being sahih, the second being hasan, and the third being daif. So the word bi-isnadin qawi, this fall under the category of being maqbul, which is the ulama discussed regarding it is either between sahih or between sahih and hasan, but it is graded as one which is acceptable. So it's an acceptable form of narration which is qawi, it is strong, indicating that it is authentic to some degree. وَرَجَّهُ الْبَيْهَقِي. So Bayhaqi rahimahullah, that is all that this narration that goes back to Ibn Abbas, that is the more authentic, that it is the more correct version of the hadith. So the most correct version is that the hadith is actually a statement of Ibn Abbas, not a statement of the Prophet ﷺ. Then, so that's concerning that hadith. So, of something in the translation, when they state concerning that Akhraj Abu Dawood fi marasil li'ikrama, what did they say when they mentioned that? Just repeat in the English. When they state concerning that, the first hadith, Akhrajahu Abu Dawood. Akhrajahu Abu Dawood fi marasil li'ikrama wa huwa rajih. What do they say in the translation there?
As the saying of Ikramah, and that is the strongest opinion. He also reported it in Mawquf.
Aywa. So when I mentioned that they mentioned that is upon Ikramah as his statement, then Ikramah is narrating this. So it's not his statement of Ikramah, rather is Ikramah narrating this hadith upon the Prophet ﷺ. So that's the correct understanding. So the person, the translator, I mentioned that is a statement of Ikramah, is not really a statement of Ikramah, but a narration from Ikramah upon the Prophet ﷺ. That is said to be maras, that's said to be of mursal, that's said to be mursal. So based upon what we can conclude, or what can be concluded, as mentioned by the ulama of this, when they discuss the hadith, that the hadith of Ibn Abbas, it is narrated, the narration of Ibn Abbas is mawsul, that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, or marfu, going back to the Prophet ﷺ. Second, it is narrated going back to, going back from Ikramah upon the Prophet ﷺ, and that is mursal. The third narration is narration going back to Ibn Abbas as his statement. As his statement. So this hadith, either some narration that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, some mention a statement of Ibn Abbas, and some mention it is mursal by way of narration of Ikramah upon the Prophet ﷺ. So those are the three narration or version of this hadith. So they mentioned that as for the first, regarding concerning going back to the Prophet ﷺ, that there's some discussion regarding that narration. So there's some discussion regarding that narration. One of the narrators in this narration that they mentioned, his name is Omar ibn Farruq. Omar ibn Farruq. So Omar ibn Farruq was not narrating that they mentioned Tafarrud bi Raf'i. That is mentioned that he's the only one narrate the hadith going back to the Prophet ﷺ. وَلَيْسَ بِقَوِي, and also he's not strong. So you have of those who mentioned that, which is Al-Bayhaqi, that the narration that is Mawsul, going back to the Prophet ﷺ with a full chain of Ibn Abbas, that narration is somewhat criticized based upon one of the narrators, who's Omar, that is narration that going back to the Prophet ﷺ, which is Omar ibn Farruq, that he himself, that is the only one who narrate the hadith going back to the Prophet, going back directly to the Prophet ﷺ, and also is under discussion. So Omar ibn Farruq also is under discussion, even though Ibn Turkamani, that he has some notes, a hashia, on the book of, he mentioned regarding concern that he state as a way of critiquing Bayhaqi, so a footnote on the book of Bayhaqi, he mentioned Omar هذا, that he mentioned لم يتكلم فيه أحد بشيء من جر فيما علمته غير البيهقي. So Ibn Turkamani, that he somewhat responds to the statement of Bayhaqi by stating, so this was said, some more little details regarding Ilm al-Hadith. So for the person who are looking to, who are following this session, these durus, regarding this explanation and the method we are following, at times the information is a bit for persons who are more in English and an advanced level in their study of hadith. So it's more for an advanced level of a person studying ilm al-hadith. And sometimes we discuss concerning the discussion regarding the grading of hadith, that sometimes we go in a little detail, not vast detail, just a little detail, but we can see that this matter is somewhat a vast area of study. So it's not for us, so it is more for a person who has some more a background of ilm al-hadith to kind of somewhat to appreciate and to understand what we're saying. So for the person who is not on that level, they don't per se have to pay great attention to these little details that we might mention regarding the grading of the hadith. And this is more for a person on a more advanced level. So I mentioned concern that this hadith, that Bayhaqi rahimahullah, have criticized this hadith by mentioning that one of the narrators of Umar ibn Farruq, that laysa biqawi, and also tafarrud bihi, is the only one that narrate this hadith indicate that there's some weakness in the hadith, and the narration of Omar is narrating what everyone did not say. But then Ibn Turkamani then now critique what have been said by Al-Bayhaqi, where he mentioned by saying, لم يتكلم فيه أحد, that no one has spoken about Umar ibn Faruq بشيء من جر, of anything regarding any form of criticism of him or anything disparaging about him, فيما علمت غير البيهقي, from what we know, meaning Ibn Turkmani, except for Bayhaqi. Then I mentioned فذكر البخاري في تاريخي, that Bukhari rahimahullah have mentioned this narrator Umar in his Tariq al-Kabir, وسكت عنه, and he didn't say anything about him, didn't say anything of praise of the person, nor anything against the person, nothing for, nor anything against this narrator. Then I mentioned ولم يتعرض Ibn Adi في ضعفه, also Ibn Adi, when he mentioned this person, also he didn't per se mention anything, state anything about him being a weak narrator or criticize of narrator. بل وثقه, rather he owed him to be وثقه, he owed him to be a credible narrator. بل وثقه Ibn Ma'in, Ibn Ma'in rahimahullah owed him to be credible. وأبو حاتم الرازي also owed him to be credible. ورضيه Abu Dawood, and also Abu Dawood somewhat is pleased with him. So from the mention that regarding this narrator Umar ibn Faruq, that the only one who have criticized him from what is mentioned by Ibn Turkmani is only Al-Bayhaqi, but we find that Bukhari mentioned him and did not say anything about him, whether for or against him, but rather, and also Ibn Adi, when he mentioned him, he didn't per se criticize him, and also they stated rather, you find that according to what is mentioned here, that is mentioned in a praiseworthy way by Ibn Ma'in and Abu Hatim, and also Abu Dawood is pleased with him. Then I mentioned فَقَدْ ذَكْرَهُ Ibn Hibban في ثقات, and also Ibn Hibban mentioned this narrator in his book الثقات. Then I mentioned وقال حافظ Ibn Hajar رحمه الله عن عمر هذا صدوق ربما وهم. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, that he mentioned that is overall assessment or grading of this person, that he mentioned Suduq is of those who are Suduq, Urbama Wahim, but perhaps he makes errors, that he may make error. So that's concerning the final grading or view of Ibn Hajar on this particular narrator. So that's concerning that matter on that narrator regarding what have been said. So said that this hadith is of those hadith that is on the discussion between the ulama regarding hadith, going back to the Prophet ﷺ, that they have mentioned that the final conclusion they mentioned with all these hadith that they mentioned, that the hadith, that what is the more correct position, that the hadith going back to the Prophet ﷺ is not authentic, fihi dhaf, is weakness in the hadith. The hadith, this hadith, is actually the statement of the version of Ikramah, going back to the Prophet ﷺ, it is mursal but it is authentic. And also that the narration going back to Ibn Abbas as his statement, then that is mawquf sahih. So the statement of it is taken as a statement of Ibn Abbas as being a statement, not the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, as that going back to the Prophet ﷺ, it is weak. And so that's concerning the overall assessment of this hadith by the ulama who have discussed this hadith. So they mentioned that هذه ثلاثة أوجه لهذا hadith, as mentioned by Abdullah Fawzan. Then I mentioned رؤيا مسندا, it is narrated Muslim going back to the Prophet ﷺ. رؤيا مرسلا, also مرسلا, also narrated. رؤيا موقوفا, and also narrated as being موقوف. They mention فقد رجع البيهقي موقوف, that Bayhaqi hold a hadith to be موقوف, going back to Ibn Abbas. كما ذكره حافظ, as stated by Al-Hafid Ibn Al-Hajar rahimahullah. So Hafid Ibn Hajar, that also more inclined toward this view. That is a statement of Ibn Abbas, as he stated here, and not that of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's concerning this hadith. Then also they mentioned that Ibn Ahmed rahimahullah in his Musnad also have mentioned regarding a portion of hadith. We mentioned Ahmed rahimahullah, we mentioned marfu upon the Prophet ﷺ قال لا يباع الثمر حتى يطعم, that one is not to sell fruits until they are able, until they are ripe, until they're fit. Then I mentioned isnaduhu sahih ala shart shaykhan or shaykhain, that this hadith with that narration, with that version, it is authentic, going back to upon the condition of Bukhari and Muslim. So that's concerning that narration. As for narration of the second hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, that the Prophet the Prophet Islam naha an bay madamin wal malaqin. The Prophet said that hadith is mentioned that daif, that hadith rawahu al-Bazzar, and it is fi isnadihi daf. Its isnad, it is said to be weak. And that I mentioned Ibn Bazar rahimahullah when he said, لا نعلم أحد, we do not know of anyone, أحدا رواه هكذا إلا صالح, that we know of no one has narrated this hadith in this manner except for a Saleh, ولم يكن بحافظ, and Saleh is not a person who is a hafiz, is not one who is said to be an hafiz. وقال حافظ في التقريب ضعيف يعتبر به. After rahimahullah, he mentioned regarding this narrator of the hadith of Abu Hurairah, who is Saleh ibn Abi Akhdar, that mentioned that Ibn Hajar mentioned Da'if Ya'tabar bihi, is someone who's weak, and his hadith somewhat can be used at times. The hadith can be used as a form of a supporting evidence. Then he mentioned again Ibn Hajar rahimahullah in another of his book, that is Bukal, another said Fihi Salih ibn Abi Akhdar wa huwa Da'if, that he mentioned is Da'if. Also again that is Da'if. ومعروف عن سعيد بن مسيب موقوفا, and that the hadith goes back to Sa'id bin Musayyid mawqufan, as is a statement as mentioned by Al-Muwatta and Sa'id bin Musayyib. So that's concerning those two hadith are said to be da'if that have been mentioned. So that's concerning the ruling on those two hadith. The ruling on those two hadith. The next of those hadith regarding that these two hadith, that as for what they discuss concerning those matters regarding type of business transaction that are said to be invalid, or said to be type that are considered to be gharar, which is said to be some form of deceit or improper business practice. So improper business practice that are not said to be valid. So he mentioned a series of those kind of type of practices that are said to be improper or said to be of a form of deceit. Then these are of those type. So he mentioned regarding concerning of those type that are mentioned here, that he discussed concerning the first of those where he mentioned that an-nahi from this hadith, what can be taken, nahi an al-bay al-thamar hatta tut'im, where it is not allowed for one to sell the fruits until the fruit until it is ripened and it becomes ripened. That I mentioned regarding concerning this matter, that so concerning that tut'im in this case, or tut'am in this case, they mentioned what is meant by this is regarding concerning hatta yabdahu or yabda salahaha, that the item that is become ripe. So regarding tut'im, that it is become fit enough where it can be eaten. So that's what is meant by this case. So the person is not allowed to sell the fruits until it is fit enough to be eaten. It is fit enough. That is what is intended or meant. So they mentioned regarding concerning this matter that between the ulama, that of the ulama who mentioned regarding concerning that from this, that لا يجوز البيع الثمار حتى يدخلها الطعم ويبتدي فيها نجج, that a person is not allowed to sell something that the item is fit. So the person is not regarding fruits, one is not allowed to sell them on their fit. So meaning fit, it doesn't mean that it's fully ripe, but it is suitable to be used or soon enough to be ripe. So it is fit where it is, if it is put aside, then it can ripe a few days after, but it's fit enough where it somewhat can be used. It is of manfa, it is of benefit. So those who say it is but with this matter, that of the ulama who all concerning that such a product is not allowed to be sold, because it is not ripe or fit, or it is not ripe enough to be eaten, so it is not allowed to be sold, as the direct hukum that is taken, or ruling that is taken from the hadith, is not allowed to be sold until it is ripe. So of the ulama who take the position that it is not allowed to be sold, to be bought, until that item, that product, that fruit until it is ripe enough. So those who mention because of this that this hadith is nahi, the illah, the reason for that is because of gharr, where there's some form of the person that the person doesn't know if the item will become ripe or not. So it's the person is not certain that this item, because it is not ripe, that you're not guaranteed that it will be ripe enough or suitable enough for the person to use it who have bought the item. So based upon it, they mentioned that it is not allowed to be sold. This item, inshallah ta'ala, will be discussed further. Again, this topic will be discussed further again later, inshallah ta'ala, in more details. So there's a khilaf between the ulama, that of the ulama, so give some concession and some guidelines regarding this, but that will be discussed further in upcoming chapters. So the second masala on this, so the second method regarding concerning bay asuf ala dhur, that selling of wool, that and while the animal is still on the back of the animal, so selling of the wool while the animal what is still on the animal, is this allowed or not allowed? Is it allowed for one to do so, to sell the wool of the animal while it is still, the fur is still on the animal? That they mention regarding concern that no, because it is something which is majhul. A point to be raised before we finish this hadith, before we will make mentioned that just to go back to this discussion, that in discussing of this hadith, a point that we should have discussed, that we'll find that in the Sharh of Tawdi al-Ahkam min Bulugh al-Maram by Sheikh al-Bassam. So a Sheikh al-Bassam of those of explanation of Bulugh al-Maram, when he discussed concerning this hadith, he mentioned regarding concerning hadith, he mentioned Darj al-Hadith, he mentioned the hadith of the hadith, he mentioned the hadith of Ibn Abbas, he mentioned hadith mursal sahih, that hadith is mursal sahih, but then he mentioned روي بإسناد صحيح موقوفا على ابن عباس ولكن له حكم الرفع. But they mentioned with the Shah, they mentioned that also the hadith have been narrated with the isnad which is sahih going back to Ibn Abbas, ولكن له حكم الرفع. That's the Shah that I wish to mention, where he mentioned that even though it's a statement of Ibn Abbas, but he owes that this hadith, that the hadith is said to be going back to the Prophet ﷺ, as he mentioned, إذ هو مما لا مجال للرهي فيه. As this hadith he state that even though it's a statement of Ibn Abbas, that is more correct version and a more authentic version of the hadith, that is a statement of Ibn Abbas, but Ibn Abbas, it will take the ruling of that, of the statement of the Prophet ﷺ. So even though it's a statement of Ibn Abbas, but it will take the ruling as if it was something passed by the Prophet ﷺ, according to what has been mentioned by Sheikh Bassam. They mention إذ هو مما لا مجال للرأي فيه. As in this matter, he owes that. It's not something for Ibn Abbas to give his opinion on this matter. It's not an area where it is open for Ibn Abbas to give his opinion on this matter. But Allahu Alam, that matter needs to be looked into further regarding what he has stated as why he owes it or classes to be Hukum al-Raf. But something to be mindful of. So you have even books that have been written on this topic regarding at what are the guidelines and the rules to say when a hadith of a companion is class or raised to being that of Hukum al-Raf. Where that is something that needs to be looked into further. Our next point, so that's concerning that matter. So on this matter, that we'll come back. Then I mentioned the second of those masala, the second of those things that are discussed regarding that the wool on the sheep or the animal, can it be sold while it's still on the back of the animal? So on this matter, you find the ulama on this matter that they divide into aqwal. So on this matter, that there's two aqwal of the ulama, qawlan on this matter. The first of those aqwal of the ulama on this matter regarding is it permissible for one to sell the wool of the animal while still in the animal's body. They mentioned that, of the ulama mentioned, la yajuz. Of the ulama who take the position as something which is la yajuz, because fihi jahala, because it's something which is unknown as to, and also, so they ordered something of fihi jahala, so it is not allowed, something which is unknown, so it is not, and also is concerned it goes back to where of gharar, according to that opinion. So they mentioned that here concerning hada, this is the call of the Hanabila, that such sale is not allowed. Selling the wool of the animal while it's still on the body of the animal is not allowed. And also قول of the they mention وهو قول الحنفية على ما في ظاهر رواية, that also a قول of the Ahnaf also on this, وقول الشافعية وإسحاق وابن منذر, and also regarding those who say it's not allowed, also the قول of the Shafi'iyya وإسحاق وابن منذر, واختياره Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz عملا بهذا الحديث. So of those that he mentioned that they take the position it's not allowed, and of those of the ulama who have taken this position, he mentioned the method of the Hanabila, of the Ahnaf, Shafi'iyya, Ishaq, Ibn Munzir, is the position of contemporary Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, based upon what is mentioned in this hadith, based upon what can be taken from this hadith that have been mentioned, the hadith of Ibn Abbas. So what is there? What is apparent from the hadith of Ibn Abbas, that it forbid this act. The second position is those who say it is permissible. The second position regarding the sale of the wool on the back of the animal, or the body of the animal, that it is something which is permissible. And they mention جواز البيع الصوف على ظهر بشرط جزه في حال, that they mention that the person can shave, it can be cut away or can be shaved or shear, so the person can shear it, remove it, cut it off from the animal, so it is something which is allowed. And they mentioned that that this is something that can be done, and it is something which is done, and also what have been removed from the animal or been cut or sheared, that it can be delivered. It can be delivered to the buyer. So they mentioned that this is it is possible to do so, and not much harm is put to the animal, so it is something which is allowed. So they mentioned that this is the qawl of Imam Malik, Riwayah, and Ahmed, that is permissible. Of those who are inclined towards this view, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, and also Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, of those who incline towards this view. So we have Imam Malik, Riwayah Imam Ahmed, Ibn Taymiyyah, and also Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, jamihan, who take the position that it is something which is allowed. It is allowed. And I mentioned that of one, that the hadith that is used, a hadith is daif, and it is something that can be done and done regarding shearing away of the wool from the animal, and it can be sold, and there's not much harm to the animal. There's not much harm that comes to the animal from this. So something which is possible, so it is something that can be sold. It is something that can be removed from the animal without harming the animal, so it is something which is allowed to be done. So that's concerning that second view on this matter. So Allahu Alam, that they mentioned that, so that's the view that are held by the ulama, those all that is not allowed, and also those who take the position is something which is allowed. It is allowed. Then the second hadith, so that's concerning that hadith, وَلَبْنْ فِي دَرْ, and also I've discussed concerning that لَبْنْ فِي دَرْ, regarding the milk inside that, we have discussed concerning buying of things that are unknown in the womb, or in the breast of the milk already in the breast, because a person doesn't know as to what will be received, the quantity or the quality, then also becomes something becomes of those things that are unknown regarding, because the quantity and the quality is unknown, then becomes something which is not to be sold, and becomes an impermissible business transaction, as we have discussed before. That's for the second hadith they mentioned regarding the hadith of the Prophet Islam, Nahi an bay, Madamin, wa Malaqi, that ulama mentioned regarding concerning that these two terms, Madamin, so Madamin, that Akthar, majority of ulama, they mentioned regarding concerning that, it is what's in the spinal cord, or the sperms of the animal, the male animal, and also Malaqih, then this is in discussion regarding that what's in the womb of the she camel. So discuss concerning the sperms and the male camel, or that which is in the womb of the female camel, that and we have discussed concerning those matters before. So Abu Ubaid, Malachi, ma fi batn or fi butun, what's in the womb, and also which is the the fetus, and I mentioned مضامين ما في أصلاب الفحول, what's in the spine, or what's in the spinal column of the male camel. So those things are not allowed to be sold, as we have discussed before. So selling concerning those things is not allowed, as we had discussed before. So that's concerning these two hadith and what they contain regarding ahkam. So it discussed regarding matters regarding of those things which is manuya anhu, those things that are forbidden to be sold. So these are classed as things that are not allowed to be sold because of gharar that are involved, of those things that we discussed regarding fruits before they're fit. They're not allowed to be sold. So if they're green, not suitable, then it's not allowed for them to be sold at all. But if they are fit, then even though not fully ripe, they can be sold. And we said that discussion will be discussed further. Then as for suf, the wool on the animal, then that can be sold according to some of the ulama. And you have others who take the position that it's not allowed to be sold based upon what has been mentioned in the hadith. لا يباع السوف على ظهر, that you are not allowed to buy the wool while it is still upon the animal. But of the ulama also two view on this matter, and also regarding concerning matter regarding what's in the womb of the she camel, or that which is in the liquid, the sperms of the male camel, then also those things are not allowed. So that's concerning of what can be taken or extracted from those hadith regarding the ahkam that relates to of those transactions are said to be min masahil manhi an, those masail that are forbidden based upon al-gharar, which comes in different ways. So al-gharar that comes in different forms, where the person does not as mentioned, not knowing of certain things and the outcome of those things. So that inshallah ta'ala will end this discussion regarding this particular these two hadith and what can be taken from them. Just another regarding ilm al-hadith, and to show regarding concerning that, as we said, at times it's important that at times one book is not sufficient, and a person also to make to reference or cross-reference of the information at times, so as to make sure everything is accurate. They mentioned regarding concerning of the matter when they discussed the hadith. So when they discussed concerning the hadith, that we mentioned Ibn Turkamani, that ta'aqub, that he refuted or responded to Al-Bayhaqi of his critique of the hadith of Ibn Abbas. Then they mentioned what he stated, as they mentioned in this book. He mentioned, so Sheikh Abdullah Fawzani mentioned, لم يتكلم فيه أحد بشيء من الجر فيما علمت غير البيهقي وذكر البخاري في تاريخي وسكت عنه. So that's what he mentioned. So what is stated there, the English rendering will be لم يتكلم فيه أحد, that no one has spoken about this narrator, or we mentioned Omar, بشيء من الجر, of anything of critiquing of him, disparaging statement, فيما علمت, of anything that I am aware of, meaning Ibn Turkamani, غير البيهقي, other than Al-Bayhaqi. وذكره, he was mentioned, then he stated, Bukhari mentioned him في تاريخي, in his book At-Tarikh. Then in one of the tahqiq that they mentioned in the tahqiq of the book Bulugh Maram, it is stated in this tahqiq, when it mentions hadith, they state, رده, they mention رده عليه Ibn Turkamani في جوهر النقي. فقال, so Jawhar al-Naqi is by Ibn Turkamani, that he has some footnotes on the book of Bayhaqi, some footnotes on the book of Bayhaqi. So he mentioned, and it is printed with the book of Bayhaqi. Then he said, فقال لم يتكلم فيها أحد بشيء من الجر, that no one has stated anything that is disparaging regarding this narrator, فيما علمت, from what I'm aware of, غير البيهقي غير البخاري. Did I mention فيما علمت غير البخاري? So he mentioned that other than Bukhari. So it's غير البخاري, ذكر بخاري, did I mention غير بخاري, وذكره بخاري في تاريخي وسكت عنه ولم يتعرض ابن أدي إلى ضعفه. So he mentioned that some Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan mentioned غيب البيهقي. In this other print or checking, he mentioned غير Bukhari. So that needs to be checked. And Allahu Alam, he mentioned وذكر Bukhari في تاريخه وسكت عنه. So he mentioned that, and also that Bukhari mentioned in the book Tariq وسكت عنه, and he remained silent. So you see that when he mentioned غير Bukhari, that what is correct is, but to be verified and to be double checked, or refer back to those them regarding concerning what is mentioned by At-Turkmani, that he mentioned Bayhaqi or Bukhari. So to, as I say, exactly to so being precise at that change, that have a big change, whether it was stated by Al-Bayhaqi or Bukhari. So those are the things that one has to be mindful of regarding these masail that may come up. So I said overall regarding, that has been stated regarding these masahil, regarding the bab of Kitab al-Buyu. So this inshallah ta'ala, that will end. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخرة والحمد لله أمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. How long was that one? 40 minutes.